Well, as you might have noticed, it's 10:30 in the morning here at Central Standard Time, if you're anywhere in that central time zone. And that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs. We will be exploring some very interesting things today. And I'd like to remind you that this is an interactive program. And what that means is that we look to you to add value to the value that we try to bring to you by participating. That means if you have questions, questions can escape sometimes, so you might want to at least jot down a note to what you might want to ask. If you have contributions, maybe you have an experience that lines up with the subject that we're talking about. So please join, and we'll have specific times where we'll bring you in. Also, if some people are just shy to to actually have their voices um, and their faces seen, so you can put stuff in the chat if you'd like. And notice in the chat there will usually be some other information, as maybe links will come up, and we'll put those in. Stacy will put those in the chat as well, and you can take advantage of those. Uh, but the important thing is to participate in this group discussion, because all of us will always be smarter than any one of us. And when we crowdsource our issues, then we're likely to get more value out of a discussion about those issues. When we often go to a doctor or go to a hospital, most of what we see and most of, quite frankly, what is done has to do with the clinical approach. There's lots of tests and there's lots of exams and, a lot of science. But what is often missing is the humanities. And we often undervalue what that kind of contribution can make. We have our bodies, and the bodies are going through kinds of chemical and biological transitions and changes. But a lot of it has to do with how we interact with each other. We don't often think about that, like things like music and art and things like that as part of a healing process. But in fact, that's kind of new, not to think of that. Historically, people have used music and art and things like that, and they've been very aware of how that changes us and changes our feeling, and indeed changes how we feel every day. If you're happy every day, and if you have see the colors and the things around you, the interactions between you and your family, if all those things are good, you tend to be in better health than if they're not. If the stress, uh, creates problems. So there's an effort now to bring the humanities and all those things that are connected with the humanities and the understanding of our human relationships and things like that. There's an effort to bring that back into medical practice. We have somehow, in our drive to get the science better, because that was really lacking for most of human history. We're now saying, okay, like we need to bring some balance back. And so there are folks who are working on getting that back in balance. And a couple of them are my guests today, or our guests really today. And that's Peter Hazing and Amber Allen. I'm going to let them talk about themselves, because I like people to introduce themselves rather than my giving my version of them. So okay, so let's start off with Peter, who is the Associate Vice President of Research and Development at Dakota State University. Welcome, Peter.
Thanks very much, and thanks for having us on the program, Mr. Diggs. People probably kind of wonder, because my main role at DSU is how I spend most of my time, what indeed my connection to the Sanford School of Medicine at USD is. And that started with a small adjunct role. I was collaboratively teaching one course with Dr. Jerome Freeman and the former director of the DeGroat Center, Ellie Schellinger. And that's a humanities survey for late stage medical students. And we had great fun teaching that together. And after a few years, the medical school offered a part-time directorship to kind of expand what they were doing in the humanities at the medical school. So that's been a wonderful opportunity, and I'm very fortunate that Dakota State permits me the time to work on these kinds of things. So I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm really glad to see some friendly faces. Uh, um, Hi, Janet. Hello, Christina. Good to see you. And Amber, thanks so much for joining us today. So this medical humanities program has been around in one shape or form via a section of the Sanford School of Medicine faculty called the Ethics and Humanities section for some 25 plus years, probably closer to 30 at this point. And when that section started, humanities engagement was like 1 hour of 1 week during orientation about ethics. And the old guard faculty will tell you that even at that time, the folks who were focused on like basic biological sciences and things, and some even resisted that much. The culture and the tone of all of that has changed significantly in those ensuing years, and the ethics and humanities faculty have worked hard to embed bioethics and humanistic inquiry in what they do in medical education. One development along the way within the Sanford health system was the development of this DeGroat Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and the Healing Arts. And I'll let Amber talk about that. But that was an exciting development for ethics and humanities faculty who have long collaborated with folks in the DeGroat Center. So we still, for example, have what's called a Med Writers series where we engage medical students and residents and faculty in writing activities. That group is got some very simple guardrails. One is that everyone who meets together and writes engages in creative practice together. So the facilitators write, the students write, everybody who's there writes. The other rule is the only sharing we do is strictly voluntary. So if people write something that they're not ready to share, then that creates some space for them to reflect on things that are happening in clinical practice, or to allow their minds to wander as necessary, and everything in between. But then it also creates some context where people can move those writing pieces and develop them further and publish them in various ways too. The other collaboration has been this humanities survey course that I mentioned. And there are a number of new collaborations that will interest Janet and others who are interested in arts. So if you have not been to the Sioux Falls campus of the medical school recently, or ever, I would encourage everyone to go in that bottom floor on West 22nd and have a look at the curatorial work that's been done there. There is donated work. There's visual art on loan. There are all kinds of things happening in the med school to create space for the visual arts, and they're very exciting. And the next phase of that is going to be student art in Wegner Health Sciences Library. So there's a steering committee for that, separate from the ethics and humanities section, that's working on visual arts in particular. And again, Sanford Health and Avera Health have been partners for a long time with ethics and humanities faculty members in curating kind of clinical spaces. But now we're sort of bringing some of that influence that's been around the community for a long time into the med school to let students know that, hey, this arts and humanities engagement is something that's important to the faculty, in part because it's important to students, or to patients rather, but also because it's important to students and physicians as pathways to maintaining their own well-being and avoiding burnout and all kinds of good things on that end of the influence spectrum. So that's a kind of
the 50,000-foot view.
yeah, it's a little bit of a view into what we're doing in arts and humanities at the med school. I want to let Amber have some time to say some things about the DeGroat Center, and then we'd like to talk about Speaking of Health, which is our authors and speakers series, and that's kind of the current iteration of a long time partnership with the DeGroat Center. So, Amber.
Sure.
All right. Thank you guys so much for allowing me to talk about my passion and my job and the wonderful work that we're able to do here. I am Amber Allen. I am the lead clinical ethicist at the DeGroat Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and the Healing Arts. We provide a variety of resources for those interested in biomedical ethics, integrative health, and advanced care planning. Those are really the three top services that the DeGroat Center offers here at Sanford. Starting a little bit with our integrative health. Our integrative health program incorporates both conventional and complementary approaches for symptom management for patients. This is a no-cost service that we provide for patients that are inpatient in our hospital. We have a nurse who's able to offer a variety of integrative techniques, including acupressure, aromatherapy, guided imagery or mindfulness, deep breathing, and gentle massage. Last year, 2023, our integrative health program supported over 387 patients with integrative therapies. The second aspect that we kind of focus on here is advanced care planning. And advanced care planning is that document that really tells us how you want your healthcare to be delivered in the event that you're unable to speak for yourself. Who do you trust to help make those decisions? And what are the values, goals, and preferences that you would want us to know about? So we have a facilitator training program using the evidence-based respecting choices method for having those conversations for advanced care planning. We offer free facilitations, both inpatient and outpatient, to pretty much anyone in the Sioux Falls and surrounding areas. We can set those up via appointment. We can send out materials if you want to give it a stab on your own, or if it's a little bit complicated and you don't know how to have those discussions with your family members, we have our trained facilitators who are able to sit down, have an appointment, and set that up at no cost. And then we have our ethics consultation service. So our biomedical ethics consultants act in an advisory capacity, and they help to review cases of unresolved ethical conflict, or what we kind of, very, very technical term here, the ick factor that sometimes happens in patient care. When you get that feeling that something's just not going right, we're in a really tough situation and we don't have a lot of good options, and we don't know how to resolve this conflict. And we're often able to, and are trained to, really review and understand those biomedical ethical principles and help to mediate and walk alongside both clinical team members and patients and family members as we work to resolution. In 2023, we supported 168 ethics consults. Our most consistent themes are questions about surrogate decision-making, referencing back that advanced care planning and the absolute vital importance that that plays. Questions about who should be the decision maker. What do we do if we can't find a decision maker? or that patient doesn't have family or friends, and allowing us to, how do we make those decisions in that instance, and really supporting our healthcare team members as they try to do their very best to advocate for these patients in those difficult situations. And then other common themes would be questions about end-of-life care, what that should look like, what happens when we don't have medical options, or we're looking at options that aren't possible here, or there's lack of resources, and wading through some of those really difficult steps.
How do people come in contact or interact with you to even know those services are available? How do they come into that system?
I'm really happy to say that all of our services are considered non-physician orders. I love our physicians, and that's great, but they're also very busy, and we sometimes forget about all the other members of the care team that can see what's going on. And so any of these consultative services are able to be initiated by anybody in the healthcare team, as well as patients and family members. The easiest way is to just contact the DeGroat Center via phone, which is 605-312-3520. We're available on the website. You can search ethics, you can search advanced care planning or integrative health, and they will all reference to the Sanford Health DeGroat Center. Otherwise, our in-hospital services, you can access us via our hospital directory or paging, or just ask your care team about us.
So you mentioned earlier that at least some of the services were at no cost. So I'm assuming, and since you people can not necessarily be just referred, how do they know about these no cost things, and how do you let people know about that?
Well, through programs such as this, we do a lot of our own. We're a lean and mean team because we do try to stay really lean and mean. We had a wonderful donation to the DeGroat Center via the Sanford Foundation from Norma DeGroat. And we have that endowment, which is how we use to fund some of our services. We celebrate her birthday every year in April. You should stop on by 5th floor of the hospital admin. We put a little birthday hat on her picture and have some cookies. But really, we try to just get the word out through our website. Most of our marketing material, our advanced care planning booklets, have our contact information to be able to get a hold of us.
Mm-hmm. Great. You guys are doing a program, speaking of health. Can you guys tell us about that?
Sure. So I want to get into that via our common concern across the DeGroat Center and the Ethics and Humanities faculty with pillars of biomedical ethics, right? So first, one of the reasons why it's so important for this emphasis on access to be there with the DeGroat Center is because it can be difficult to get the kinds of services that they provide reimbursed within health systems. And some health systems are different than others around all of that, but this is a tremendous community resource. And the fact that people can access those services free of charge is a huge gift to the community from Norma DeGroat. We hold in common across DeGroat Center staff and Ethics and Humanities faculty an emphasis on 4 principles in biomedical ethics: and beneficence, non-maleficence, justice, and autonomy. And we talk about
back up. You got to tell us what those things are.
Yep, I'm coming to it. So
okay.
So those come from a long history of things like protecting human subjects in research and informing people and getting their consent for medical procedures or for consent to treat. All those things that you do at the doctor's office, and you don't really think much of it because you do it every time you go to the doctor's office. But all of them have long, complicated, messy, sometimes violent histories in things that went wrong that now we have to take steps to protect people's interests. So beneficence basically means our duty within medical care circles, no matter who is offering care, to do good, to be kind, right? The big emphasis in the medical school in the last few years has been kindness. Non-maleficence means separate from doing good, don't be evil, right? So you can in the course of doing good things, find your way to motivations that aren't altogether pure, like, I don't know, maybe you get a little too into some invention that's making you money in the course of your practice, and or something like that, or just the way that you treat folks, right? Your medical students, your residents, your patients, even in the act of doing good, right? The dogged focus on efficiency can bring into view something like non-maleficence.
Right. Well, I mean, it seems like that's a kind of a question, like you're going to give a person a shot. Well, the shot's going to hurt, but something inside is going to be
sure, there has to be a greater
harm.
good, and they have to consent to it. Right. Or if they're a child, they have to
that's
assent.
exactly where the ethical conflict comes from.
Yep.
Is weighing those benefits and those harms and finding that good outweighs that harm for that individual, going to autonomy based on their preferences, values, and goals for healthcare. That's one of the biggest conundrums, is when our healthcare providers' values, preferences, and goals conflict with our patients, and we get that tension. And it's not about one principle trumping another principle. It's about finding a balance between all of them.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And does euthanasia come someplace in that discussion?
There are a million examples of how these principles could come into conflict, but certainly, actually, one of the first book that we explored in this Speaking of Health series was by a medical anthropologist who was writing on medical aid in dying. And she wrote about Vermont, she wrote about Canada, she had a couple of other case studies in there, but so yeah, medical aid in dying is one of those issues that can really cause people some consternation relative to these four principles. I'm glad that Amber brought up autonomy. The other one that we're going to deal with in the upcoming event in a really direct way is justice, which is our duty in clinical and medical circles to treat people equally and equitably. And we're inviting an author so there was this common read that the DeGroat Center does in the summer, and they pick a title, they get a group of folks together, and my understanding, Amber, is that group is interprofessional in nature, right? So there's some physicians and some nurses and some ethicists, and right?
Yep. So we sponsor a summer book read with continuing education credit, ANCC, social work credits, et cetera, to foster education, to keep ethics kind of in the forefront, and, at no cost to people, because people will do all of the CEU stuff if it's free. And we all need it for our various licensure. And so this is a great way to kind of find a topic that's meaningful and really engage all levels and all clinicians, all healthcare partners in our facility. And so we do this book read every year, and we're looking at various titles and reading books to try to find what the next great read's going to be. And we ended up on What the Eyes Don't See, which is was actually recommended to us by one of the Wegner Center librarians, is kind of where we started.
Was that Anna?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Dr. Simonson's a professional historian. She worked for a time on a postdoc in one of the Sanford research labs, and she and I have been talking about Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha and this book for a couple of years now, and wanting to invite her. So when the Humanities Council threw some more support behind this Speaking of Health series, the timing really came together. And we've done some hybrid events in the past, but what's going to happen is this book club, who will meet really between now and the event in September 17th, um, will uh, we'll discuss the book, but then she's going to come and talk about the book and her current work in a virtual environment. She's in Michigan. She does not leave her medical practice very often for very many events. But she was willing to come and do this talk. And we're thrilled to invite her, because one of the things that she really focuses on in this book, it is this notion of justice in medical care. She's a physician who garnered a huge interest in public health because of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. And it became very clear in her investigation of it that access to clean water was not equitably distributed in this place in the world. And that had huge implications for health implications for specific populations in Flint. So I can highly recommend the book, What the Eyes Don't See, Dr. Mona Hanna-Attisha. You can see more about our event on the Speaking of Health series. Oh, thanks, Amber. At the Wegner Health Sciences Library website, I've posted the link in the chat. And she's now, so I don't know a lot about her next project, and I hope that she'll talk about it at least a little bit in September. But she's still focused on this issue of justice in medical care and equity in particular across various populations of patients. So we're fascinated with this in this region, in part because Sioux Falls is a staggeringly diverse place to live. When we moved, so I grew up in Iowa, but when we moved back to the Midwest, we moved to Sioux Falls, and I very quickly realized this is a really, really different city from the one that my mother lived in the 1960s, right? When there were less than 70,000 people there. And the demographic shift has been enormous. And so we have a strong need to think about equity and justice in medical care so that our health systems can ensure that everybody in the community has got access to the care that they need. So there are a number of ways that the med school does that. There are a number of ways that Sanford and Avera do that.
Before we get into that,
Yep.
can we just take a break here and ask if there are people who have, because that's a very deep subject, are there any people who have questions, something that you, from the things that we've talked about so far, that you would need clarification on, wondering how it affects you? Just want to give everyone a chance to become involved in this conversation. Anybody? Okay. Keep thinking. If you have questions, okay. So
I have a question. Sorry.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Vicki.
I'm not completely understanding the scope of your project. Is there a website that you can go to that describes what you're doing in this new field?
Yes, good question, Vicki. You can read about the Speaking of Health series, which the Humanities Council supports, at the link that I've just posted in the chat. If you would like to read more about the other work that we're doing in health humanities at Sanford School of Medicine, I can post a prior YouTube video on a needs assessment and asset mapping project that we previously did. Or there are, I'll have to dig up the link, but there are kind of other facets of this across the med school that you can read about on the med school website as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Anyone else? I know that this period can go really quick. Okay, well, Mary, did you have something? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, well, I'm sorry, Peter, we need to interrupt from time to
Not
time.
at all. It's that's a most welcome interruption, and folks should speak up when you've got comments and
Yeah.
questions. Absolutely. There are lots of interesting minds in the room who think about arts and humanities in interesting ways, and we want to hear from you. So this current topic on justice and equity in medical care is kind of the focus of this event. Historically, the series has looked at a range of topics. So I mentioned medical aid in dying. We also looked at sexual safety and mental health with an author who's a refugee in one of the previous events. That was probably our best attended event so far, in part because I think people can really connect with memoir as a genre. And so we can sort of think about how to get at these pillars of medical ethics via different humanities and social sciences field, right? So anthropology, for example, humanistic social science. Our first author was a medical anthropologist. She was coming at some really kind of sticky and hard to sort through ethical issues as an ethnographer, right, of medical contexts. Sam Keen's work is really history work. So again, humanistic social science. He talks about the history of harm, of maleficence, really, in medical care, and what scientific discoveries have sort of pushed back on those harms. And so if folks had like ideas about authors or fields that you would like to hear from on this series, we want to hear from you. I maintain a list of books and authors along with Dr. Simonson. It's sort of a wish list of people we want to invite. And by the way, all of this started with a book club idea. The director of Wegner Library, Shelley Vasic, and Anna Simonson wanted to start a book club among med students and residents. And Anna mentioned it to me, and I said, well, gosh, I think we could find a few partners for this who are also talking about book clubs and think about how this connects with the curriculum and think about how it connects with clinical spaces. And since then, we have heard from med students who already had book clubs among themselves that we didn't know about. We've heard from residents who are now starting a new graphic medicine book club. So these would be titles that are sort of graphic novels, but usually about clinical issues and contexts. And so we hope to pull in one of those graphic things into the Speaking of Health series. And then we only kind of recently discovered this connection with the DeGroat Center and their summer read, which is a connection that I hope we'll maintain for other events. But
yeah. So along these lines, when we talk about all of these really great ideas, at some point they have to be integrated into the actual day-to-day workings of the physicians and the clinics and the clinicians. How do you do that? I mean, how is that being done? And can you give us some examples of how the trickle down happens with, you have these ideas, often they're discussed in groups like this, great ideas, but like a lot of PhD theses, they get up on the shelf and go into the ether. So
yeah,
how
so
yeah.
actually I think I like to think of this more like a bottom up,
Mm.
from the ground up kind of grassroots influence, especially in a case like Dr. Mona, right? The question for a physician like her is, how long do you see the same problem in your clinical practice before you start to ask some bigger questions about underlying causes for those problems, right? So she and her colleagues were seeing all these problems that were, related to lead poisoning in the water, and you can only sort of deal with that frustration as a medical practitioner for so long before you try to get to some root causes at a population health or public health level, and shorten the line outside your office door, so to speak. It's, if you compare it to like a hunger context, well, how it's well and good to feed the hungry, but how long do you do that and pour resources into it before you start to ask some larger questions about why folks are so hungry, and why we're not, thinking about resources in ways that would, again, shorten the line. So I'm sure Amber's got a number of other sort of references and contexts where we could sort of think about a grassroots thing, or maybe you've got a different metaphor for that, Amber.
I really like your concept of the bottom up. One of the things, our motto is educate, empower, and embed or equip. And so we're really focusing on embedding this information to the bedside, to the people that are doing the clinical work, rather than taking the administrative, the executive, and trying to transfer that. We want this to be the everyday bedside practice. One of our certified ethicists, Gretchen, who also teaches the ethics certificate course for the med school, runs a 10-week course now within the hospital, available to all of our clinicians, called Embedded Ethics. And it's really focusing on that multidisciplinary approach, knowing that it's not just doctors, it's not just nurses, it's social workers, it's, heck, you could go all the way down to the environmental services, it's our nutrition and food services, it's all of the people that are involved in that care. And we've had all of those disciplines be part of our embedded ethics. And so we're really trying to look at it from that bottom up, everybody, every person at the bedside that interacts with each patient can recognize and feel empowered to raise these issues and these questions.
Well, of course, I was thinking that you guys are on the top. That's like the things that the ideas that you have. It's like, well, wherever they are, how do they actually come to manifest? And I'm starting to get a picture, but it's not very clear. How do they transition into that bedside that you're talking about? Like I've heard of cases from people who work in hospitals that I know, where the person who is the janitor or something stopped for a moment to talk to a patient and was able to pick up on something that was bothering them and then mentioned it to the clinicians, and they were able to take it from there. But without that person being aware that, oh, that's not right, as you were saying before, that shouldn't be that way, then, maybe nothing would have happened. That patient would have kept suffering that particular issue.
It's
so how do you
education.
change it? Yeah.
One word, it's education.
Hmm.
It's education and having that resource available to any one person. Starting to level out some of those hierarchies, knowing that you're not just a nurse. You are a nurse and are empowered to speak up for safety, for the things that are right, and really shifting that organizational culture. But we do that through education, through being able to name some of the distress that we're feeling, being able to be curious and ask those questions. But why? What's going on, and help me understand your position on this and why this is important to you, rather than just dismissing it as, that they want this, but that's crazy because this is what the medical, problem says that we should do. There might be a really good reason behind it, and it could be cultural. It could be an equity or a justice thing. It could be simply different values.
Mm-hmm. So I guess what I'm struggling with is that sort of the interface. I see the two different things, and I understand that when you say education, but it just seems like the education for the person who's, let's say, cleaning the room, the education for that person to have the eyeballs and the ears and probably most of all the heart to say, oh, how are you feeling, and actually hear it or see something that's different and be able to say, that thing should not be in this place, or that thing that person said to me, maybe we should be asking a question about that. I'm not saying you're there yet, but I'm looking for to understand where you are and how you plan to get there. How does it get involved in the matrix, as I call it?
I think that's a really great question. And I think that that's something that we've been on a journey to kind of get to that point. I agree. I don't think that we're there where every person feels empowered. We do that. We're running a program of SAFE, Sanford, SAFE culture, where we're shifting our focus to really empower everybody, to give them the skills that they need to stop the line and say, this isn't right. We do that by sharing safe stories before our meetings. We do that by recognizing individuals who take the risk and stick their neck out and say, this doesn't seem right. Can we cross-check this before we proceed?
Mm-hmm.
And so
well,
it takes time.
Yes. One of the things that comes to mind is that we have a pretty diverse population, as in Sioux Falls particularly. And many of those cultures, they have a hard time even among themselves to talk about medical issues. They don't have a sense of what's in the body, yeah, and how the body works. And many of them are embarrassed to talk about certain parts of the body. And so it seems to me that in terms of like the humanities and culture and stuff like that, that some kind of translation or making it easier for people to talk about, what's really bothering them, and finding the verbiage even. It may not be just that they have a reticence or a reluctance to talk about it, but they may not have the words or the syntax. They don't know the sentence structure. Is that part of like what you're struggling with? And if so, how are you struggling with that?
So I can speak to this a little bit. In the time that I've been working with the Sanford School of Medicine, the emphasis has been really consistent that while physician care is nearly always got some kind of patient education element embedded in it, the responsibility for medical professionals to learn their patients and how they think about things linguistically or culturally or just as individuals is that onus is as strong for medical professionals as the onus for patients to sort of learn how to navigate their way through systems is, right? So that's changed since like my parents were children. It's not that we're going to stop producing hierarchies in medical or academic systems. I don't think that's going to stop happening anytime soon. So I really like Amber's emphasis on education all around, right? Interprofessional education, patient education, physician, and continuing professional development. All of those things are really equally important projects of education in all directions. But really how medical professionals think about their own hierarchies that they produce, the willingness to sort of look into our systems and question them has shifted in a huge way in the last 50 years in particular. So I regard an increasing emphasis on ethics and humanities as an important part of that shift relative to medical education at all levels, right? So we think of undergraduate medical education as, when you think of medical students, that's what we refer to as undergraduate medical education. We think of residents as graduate medical education. And then every physician has to do continuing education, you know, beyond residency or fellowship or whatever their graduate med ed experience was like. Just in the same way that people were maintaining certifications at all other levels of the operation have to do continuing education. So that that sort of lifelong learning commitment is really strong, both at the med school and at the two huge health systems that we have in this region. And I'm encouraged to see ethics and humanities becoming a larger part of it all the time. But one of the really cool outcomes of that is that we have folks who saw this implementation at some earlier stage, right? When they were medical students at USD, or when they were nurses before they went to medical school somewhere else, or maybe they've just been in nursing practice for a long time and they've sort of recently re-engaged with the DeGroat Center or with Sanford in some way, come back and then wield their own influence with their own clinical experiences on education at some level, interprofessional education, med student education, what have you. So that generational percolation has really started to happen. And folks like Gretchen are expert at encouraging that. Right. Gretchen's been teaching in the ethics curriculum for years at this point. She's both a bioethicist and she's got an MDiv, right? So she's deeply educated in philosophy and theology, and you know, to have that sort of intellectual diversity, creating a culture that that really focuses in sophisticated ways on ethics and humanities from a variety of perspectives is nothing but fun to be around. And to see students sort of discover that for the first time is even more fun.
Well, you mentioned, Peter, something about it's kind of like a two-sided thing. There's the professional, but then there's also the patient. And we've been talking about kind of like, helping the professionals get to where they can make a better contribution. Do you guys have any ways that you help the layperson, the patient, be better at communicating their needs or recognizing and even validating their cultural approach to medicine?
As an ethnographer of music and medicine, I love that question. So part of the reason why I pushed some of these book clubs toward public health humanities engagement, like the Speaking of Health series, is because they had a lot of them had really been focused on interprofessional education, which is super important. But to bring that sphere sort of in contact with public education, it, you know, creates a really productive sort of Venn diagram, where, you know, conversations that we might have had among one of those groups or another come together, and we have a whole new series of conversations. So I'm really grateful to the Humanities Council for supporting the Speaking of Health series, because that is precisely its purpose, is to bring those discourses in contact with one another.
So I want to open it up against anybody else have questions?
Yeah, Lawrence, I had a question. I think that these kind of what you guys are trying to do is so sort of below the surface of most people's, right? Here's how I go to the doctor, here's how I go to the hospital, and what about my insurance, blah blah blah, right? But so it's important for me to know who you believe. I mean, I think Pete, with your program and the medical school, it's pretty obvious that your primary constituency is students. It's either or continuing education, medical professionals, right? And Amber, I have a more ambiguity about your program and who you feel your primary constituents are, or whether you have dual primary constituencies, and how the patient kind of fits in with the work that you're doing. I think that, I mean, I'm always astonished when I think, I've lived a long time, I've had a great career, I know all this stuff, and then I hear about things that I've never heard about before. And this is the DeGroat Center is one of them. Never, I've been a Sanford person for a gazillion years, right? Don't know about it. So this idea of is it important for you to push this information to the public? How can you do that? And how do we promote these programs so that it's not just for those who have been seeking and finally got a reference or referral from a medical professional of some kind or another, nurse or family or whatever it is. How do we do that?
I think those are really great questions. I think that our primary focus and our customer base is, number one, our patients. We, in almost all aspects of our impact to healthcare, is patient focused and patient advocacy. Our advanced care planning facilitators are helping the patients to express their wishes, their desires, their preferences for their healthcare, and making sure that those are known and immortalized in their medical record. Mm-hmm. Our ethics consultants are helping to provide the patient who can't speak for themselves a voice, mm-hmm. and advocacy. Our integrative health team is allowing for complementary or alternative treatments in a medical center where, science and medicine are fact, and we don't always think about, how aromatherapy might make me feel better, but that might actually help me to heal too, because I feel better. And so we're very patient focused in that aspect. I think that from a knowledge standpoint, they don't know the name of the services that we're seeking out. Every single patient that goes to a Sanford clinic is asked at least annually if they have an advance directive or living will document, mm-hmm. and offered that information. They're not told that the name behind that information is the DeGroat Center, but they're asked the information. Same thing with our ethics consultants. They don't know that the ethics consultation service lives in the DeGroat Center, but our hospital team knows that there's a process for ethical issues. And if you search out or ask about ethics, it leads you back to the name DeGroat Center. Mm-hmm. And so they just don't know the name, mm-hmm. but I think that our presence is out there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Annie Hatch, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, thanks for letting me chime in. This has been really fascinating, and it ties back to, experience that I've had in my profession. I'm a trained folklorist, do ethnography and heritage and tradition, passing on of traditions. And I worked many years at the Utah Humanities Council, and I think one of the most exciting programs that were run there was a book discussion program for cancer survivors, and to see, just how that fit into the nature of their recovery and follow-up. But I'm hoping that you've heard of a book that really stood out for me in my reading, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down. Yeah, I see that you're nodding.
Love
yes.
that book. Yeah. And actually it was med students who recommended that book to me.
Yeah, great. So it's a young Hmong girl in California that suffers from epilepsy, and how the doctors were negotiating with the family to find ways to help her feel better, but also running into a lot of the cultural issues where, in fact, fits and seizures were seen as callings of the spirit. So the spirit calls you and you fall down. And anyway, in bringing cultural practices into the hospital, and I wonder, Pete or Amber, if either of you have specific examples where, for instance, in this case, they wanted to bring in shamanistic practices and music and or aromatherapy. I think of the Navajo that I work with that bring in song and ceremony right into the hospital, and how you negotiate those kinds of real direct, if you have any examples of direct, not conflict of culture, but inclusion of cultural practices in a hospital setting.
I think our spiritual care department is where we kind of partner for a lot of those very specific, like religious or spiritual beliefs. We do have Chaplain Ken, who is Native American and will often meet with our Native American population, which is one of the ones that just immediately comes to mind here. But we have made arrangements for sage burning and things like that for patients that hold that belief very dear to them. We also have sage bundles or sweetgrass bundles available. And then for the patients that, don't want to set up a whole burning ceremony, but do still want that, we've got sage aromatherapy that we can bring up for them as well, just to allow our patients, again, to try to empower them as much as we can and partner with them, knowing that they are really the true expert in their health, and allowing them to kind of drive some of those situations.
Does that answer your question, Annie? Or respond adequately to your comment?
Yeah, sure. Pete, I don't know, as an ethnographer, if you had any direct experiences in Sioux Falls.
A few, but certainly Amber's going to be more familiar with a range of experiences in health systems and in Sioux Falls. My clinical encounters as an ethnographer have largely been among traditional healers in Uganda. So I do talk with students about that. And there's the other thing I wanted to mention is one of the other things in the curriculum for med students is a spirituality and medicine course, where they would see a range of case studies like those that Amber mentions, and there's not a specific focus on native spirituality in that course. It's mentioned, but they try to broaden students' perspectives by reference to a number of different traditions. So native spirituality, Islam, Judaism, that, and it shifts depending on which faculty are teaching and where their experiences and expertise are. But this question that you've asked, Annie, is something of a long burning fascination for me that I have not had the desk space to explore in Sioux Falls as deeply as I'd like. I see a future at some point where I could do more ethnographic work in clinical contexts, and Sioux Falls would be a fascinating place to do it. But I got a lot going on, so I haven't gotten there yet.
It takes a while to get around to all of the spots that a person could go, and we usually don't live long enough to go to all the places we should go.
Well, so, and good ethnography it has to start with building relationships and gaining trust and access to spaces and all those kinds of things too. So I've not been in a hurry on that on purpose.
Takes time.
Yeah.
Well, we're actually down to our last few seconds. And I think in the chat by this time, there should be some links to where you can go to get more information and find out how we can lift the veil on one of these programs, which are really important to all of us. And I would urge you also, when you find out things, you know, particularly on this program, but in general in life, and you find something that even if it's not particularly useful to you, you feel it could be useful to someone, make a little note of someplace. If you have a computer, make a file, even if it's a Word file, with some of these links, because you know it's kind of like one of those things with like a dream. You know, you dream something and the next morning you say, well, that was a good idea, and 10 minutes later you can't remember what the thing was about. So it helps to make some notes, and not just rely on our memories. With that, I want to thank both Amber and Peter for joining us today and sharing some exciting work that they're doing. I hope that all of you will come back next week, same time, same station, where we will continue brainstorming the human connection. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks so much.